Across central Israel, families are waking up choking on toxic plumes drifting over the so-called Green Line. Fires ignited in Palestinian Authority territory, burning night after night. Residents call it chemical terrorism. The government calls it cross-border pollution. But as the Knesset finally convenes to discuss the crisis, one truth is becoming impossible to ignore. This is environmental terrorism, and it's getting worse. Shalom, folks. Welcome to Judeacation here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. I am in the JNS Media Hub in Jerusalem. We're going to talk about environmental terrorism in just a few minutes. We've done so in the past, but it is getting worse and worse. But first, I want to talk about the vote that was held this week at the UN General Assembly. Two resolutions, one demanding a withdrawal from Judea, Samaria, and parts of Jerusalem, which they called occupied Palestinian territory, and the other one calling on the Israeli government to give up the Golan Heights. They refer to that as the Syrian Golan. So the Golan Heights, let's start with that. It was an Egyptian drafted resolution. It passed 123-7 with 41 abstentions. The other one, titled Peaceful Settlement of the Question of Palestine, which I'm not sure exactly where that is, maybe Narnia, was adopted 151-11 with 11 abstentions. So two resolutions there calling on Israel to end what they called its occupation of Palestinian territory. They want to evacuate all the Jews who live in Judea and withdraw from all the land which Israel won in a defensive war of survival, that's me saying it, not them, in 1967. So the Golan resolution, the UN is saying, and those countries who voted for this resolution are saying, hand over this territory, which is so important for strategic reasons, to Syria, a government which is brand new, and we really don't know about what the future holds for Syria. Are they stable? Are they not stable? And this is supposed to bring about peace. Israel relinquishing control over such a strategic and, of course, historic piece of territory in the northeastern section of Israel. And of course, Israel now, we have IDF troops in Syria on the Syrian side of the Golan. And of course, we have the Hermon mountain, which is basically the eyes of the country looking north. But the UN wants us to get out of the Golan. If it was up to the UN, based on the way they vote against Israel, you would have Syrians atop the Kinneret, or the Lake of Galilee, firing down on the farmers below. Now, how do I know that? Because that was the case before 1967. That was the daily reality for Israelis near the Kinneret, the Lake of Galilee. You had Syrians firing down below. Do we really want to take a chance and give the Golan to Syria based on this, let's call it a recommendation from the UN? 100% no, absolutely not. And in terms of Judea and Samaria, the UN and those countries who voted for the resolution, they would prefer to reward Hamas for the October 7th massacre by turning over territory, even if it's to the PA. The PA, they're just terrorists in suits. Or Hamas, which eventually may take over that area as they did in Gaza. The corrupt PA, as I said, terrorists in suits, that still has, by the way, their pay-to-slay program. So you want to throw Jews out of our ancestral biblical homeland, which is so important for strategic reasons, overlooking 75% of the country, overlooking Ben Gurion Airport. You want to take this chance. That's what the UN is saying, okay? And let's be clear. Number one, first and foremost, okay, this has been Jewish land for thousands of years. Let's not mince words when we're talking about Judea and Samaria. And again, as I said, the UN is saying, let's have another October the 7th. Israel left Gaza, we got October the 7th. Let's take another chance and turn over territory to the PA, Hamas, whoever assumes control of that area. And this is suicide for the state of Israel, a so-called two-state solution, which the UN is voting for. This is suicide for the state of Israel, which sadly the UN supports this. Folks, they want to see more dead Jews. The countries who voted for this resolution want to see more dead Jews. That is the bottom line. That is why they're passing this resolution. October the 7th wasn't enough for them. They want Israel to take more chances with its security for promises of peace. We've been doing this now for the last 30 plus years. These promises of peace, turning over strategic territory to the PA, to these other entities, and that's what we get October the 7th. And Israel should not do this again. I know it's not legally binding, this resolution, but the fact that they continue to vote against Israel time and time again, more than any other country in the world, more than other countries in the world combined, they pass these resolutions against Israel, par for the course there, the UN. I'm going to call an audible now, folks. This was not part of my plan for today, but I think it has to be addressed. The fact that 200 Hollywood elites, including some Jews, signed some sort of petition, 200 of them, calling for the release of Marwan Barghouti. Do you know who Marwan Barghouti is? He is a master terrorist convicted for the murder of at least 5 Israelis, at least 5. That's just what he was convicted of, 5 life sentences. And these cultural elites, including people like Paul Simon, they want Barghouti to be released. This would be a horrible mistake. You know, they wanted Barghouti to release some of these people during the hostage negotiations. They called for the release of Barghouti. Israel said no, and Israel really has to stick to its guns. But it's really troubling to me that these 200 Hollywood actors and singers and whatnot who know nothing about the reality here in Israel see Barghouti as some sort of freedom fighter instead of the master terrorist that he is. Barghouti should remain in prison for the rest of his life. If Israel had the death penalty, I would definitely advocate for Barghouti to be killed. The fact that he's a mass murderer, yet some of these Hollywood movie stars have absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. And it's sad, it's disheartening, and does it really, I don't know, does it make a difference that 200 signed a petition? I don't think so in the long term in terms of Barghouti's future. But that being said, it just shows you just how some people in this world really have lost all moral clarity. I thought it was important to bring up because Marwan Barghouti did live in Judea and Samaria and carried out these heinous crimes, these murders, targeting Israelis, targeting Jews. Let's talk about the further uptick in terrorism, if we're on that topic, in Judea and Samaria. Just last night, Saturday night, there was an attempted car ramming in the Hebron area, where Hamas, by the way, is very, very popular. That was last night. Alert soldiers neutralized the terrorist. In Hebron this past week, another similar attempt to murder a group of IDF soldiers using a car as a weapon, trying to run into the soldiers with their car. Thank God the attacker was neutralized eventually. There was a chase, and they eventually found him in Hebron. He was killed, and I saw this video. I don't know if you've seen this. Maybe if we have the clip, we can show it, of an attempted terrorist attack targeting 2 soldiers near the Atarid community. That's in the Binyamin region. Now, the soldiers checked out this would-be terrorist. They checked his person. They asked him questions. They interrogated him a little bit. But eventually, he reached into his bag and pulled out a knife and tried to stab one of the soldiers. And it's an absolute miracle that this soldier and the other soldier involved were only hurt lightly. It could have ended much worse. But what we're dealing right now with here is an upswing in terrorism. And last week I talked about, unfortunately, a 71-year-old Israeli was murdered at the Gush Etzion Junction. And now Israelis are being attacked, in this case soldiers, are being attacked on the roads of Judea and Samaria almost on a daily basis. It's worrisome, it's frightening. And I know the IDF stops about 90+%, if not 95% of all terrorist attempts at terrorism, but it's getting worrying. The focus has been on Gaza for so long, and now Judea and Samaria, we're seeing this kind of upswing in terrorism. In the case of that video, the soldiers need to know, better be safe than sorry. Thank God they were able to neutralize the terrorists eventually. But this, again, this could have ended much worse, and thank God it was only light injuries. But we have to keep our eyes on the situation in Judea and Samaria, and the Jordan Valley, all these areas of the country where the terrorists are trying on a daily basis to murder Jews. So in that light, what is actually happening on the ground to prevent terrorism? I mentioned the IDF thwarts over 90% of the attacks. There was a major operation this past week in northern Samaria. It was called Operation Five Stones. The military says the troops searched hundreds of structures, questioned hundreds of Arabs under the PA, carried out 20 airstrikes, which is pretty rare in Judea and Samaria. 30 suspects arrested. At least 6 terrorists were killed by the border police, by IDF commandos and other forces operating in that area. From what I understand, the operation, this particular operation, is now over in northern Samaria. But thank God the IDF has access to these places, as opposed to Gaza, where Israel did not have boots on the ground for the last 18 years, and we got October the 7th. It's so important from a security perspective for the IDF on a nightly basis to go into these villages in Area A, which is under full Palestinian Authority control, make these arrests, when necessary, take out these terrorists, and confiscate all these illegal weapons, which these people want to use against Jews, not only in Judea and Samaria, but throughout the state of Israel. Now, as promised, we are now going to talk about, once again, environmental terrorism in Judea and Samaria. It's terrorism, folks. That's the bottom line. It's terrorism. Just like when you throw rocks, you're literally trying to choke people, Jews who live in Judea and Samaria, and in other cities. You're talking about Shoham, you're talking about Rosh Ayin, those cities which are adjacent to Judea and Samaria. They are inhaling smoke on a nightly basis. These are areas just outside of Ben Gurion Airport. You're talking about Lod, you're talking about Tel Aviv suburbs, where people cannot breathe on a nightly basis because of environmental terrorism, these illegal fires being lit by Arabs under PA control who are burning waste, who are burning all sorts of chemicals and whatnot. The situation is absolutely horrible. So there was a discussion of the Knesset Interior and Environmental Committee this past week as this environmental terrorism emanating from the PA gets worse and worse. Environmental Protection Minister Idit Silman says that she has put together, a strategic plan to deal with illegal waste burning in Judea and Samaria, which crosses over. Of course, there's no border which can block out illegal security. There are no illegal burning, rather. There are no checkpoints which can block illegal burning. It's in the air. It is getting into kids' lungs. So again, her ministry has allocated $40 million, 40 million shekel, $12.4 million, to help rehabilitate one of two landfills in Judea and Samaria, hiring additional inspectors, including at checkpoints, and taking all these measures in order to try to get a handle on some of this illegal burning. Ynet reported nights in Shoham, that's a city just outside of Ben Gurion Airport, and the surrounding areas. Okay, this is where this is happening. It's an environmental nightmare. That's how the residents describe the situation. Thick, toxic smoke from waste fires in PA-controlled areas, blanketing Israeli communities. Residents are coughing, gasping for air, and furious. They call it chemical terrorism. I call it environmental terrorism. Heavy smoke in the air for several nights straight. And as I said to you several weeks ago, we had that situation in Gush Etzion, where I live, where I had to have the windows in my house closed for a week because of illegal fires being burned, illegal dumping sites, and fires under the Palestinian Authority. Modi'in, if you know people in Modi'in, that community, Rosh Ayin, as I mentioned, Shoham, other communities, with these hazardous wastes and materials being burnt. The civil administration also being involved now, dealing with illegal dumping sites and this whole issue. But we have to treat, this is the bottom line, we have to treat this like terrorism, and we have to fight this like terrorism, because that is what it is. Hopefully the situation will improve for the Israelis living in these communities. I wrote an article on JNS this week talking about the community of Bet El, that's just north of Jerusalem in the Binyamin area. A group of parents from a middle school in that community are upset, very concerned for the safety of their children, as 50 PA Arabs are working on a construction site just outside of the middle school. In fact, last Sunday, several parents decided they were going to keep their kids home because they thought it wasn't safe enough to send their kids to school. So this was sort of a protest by the parents. The work site there has several guards stationed. There was a meeting, again, meetings held between parents, the school, and the municipality in Binyamin and Bet El specifically. What are they going to do to deal with the fact that Arabs are, as some parents said, monitoring movement, patrolling what's going on, getting a feel for which kids are at the school, how many kids, how many employees are there at the school, who the teachers are, or whatnot, really just spying on this school. And we've seen this before. Unfortunately, leading up to October the 7th, you had Arabs who were working in some of those Gaza border communities, who we found out after the fact were actually spying on those communities, finding their soft spots, and that way they could plan the October 7th massacre. So these parents here saying that they're not going to tolerate it. If they can't come up with some sort of solution here, they're going to keep their kids home. And it's very frightening because you don't know whether any of these workers are going to launch a terrorist attack, whether, like I said, they're monitoring the community, they're looking for those soft spots. I feel for these parents who are afraid to send their kids to school, and it looks like they are working on a solution now, how to make sure that there isn't any contact at all. Increase security guards, all sorts of different preventatives there, so the Arabs are not in touch, can't communicate, and can't really even be in the line of sight with the students who are in that middle school. And we'll have to monitor that situation in Beit El. I think we say this almost every week. The Palestinian Authority continues terror payments, despite, by the way, promises to the European Union. Now, the EU representatives this week some EU representatives confronted PA officials with evidence that they continue to transfer funds to terrorists and their families. It's called pay to slay. Of course, the Palestinian Authority, this is their most important, in their words, their most important program in which they transfer money on a sliding scale based on how many Jews you murder to terrorists. And if a terrorist is killed in the act, the money goes to their families. Essentially, these people, these terrorists, are on the payroll of the Palestinian Authority for life. So the European Union, according to this report, is changing its approach towards the PA. A meeting was held with senior PA officials last month. And these, by the way, are EU officials who are friendly to Israel. It's not the whole EU. Don't get the wrong idea here. And the issue here is the PA's violation of agreements regarding continued payment to terrorists. And these EU officials, pro-Israel ones, are demanding they stop transferring these funds to those who carry out attacks. So, first of all, as I said, PA continues this program. I'm glad these officials took these steps. Certainly glad, but the problem really here is that they're not representative of all the EU, who continues to send funds to the PA, not demand transparency, and continues basically to support pay to slay, whether they know it or not, whether they care or not. This money is going towards the PA, towards pay to slay, and we have to monitor this situation and see how it plays out. If the EU perhaps one day will actually take meaningful steps in order to make sure that the money doesn't go to pay to slay. I mean, I have been saying for a long time, the PA should just be going in general. We shouldn't be giving money to the PA. The PA shouldn't exist. These are terrorists in suits who continue to incite the violence in their schools, in the media, on a daily basis, inciting against the state of Israel and the Jewish people. We should not be supporting, funding, encouraging, bolstering any of that. And the least the European Union can do is stop these payments, which go directly towards pay to slay. And that's all the time we have for this week on Judeacation here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. Make sure you continue to like, subscribe, click that super thanks button here, and support all the programming here at JNS TV and, of course, at jns.org, your source for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. And I want to thank the people behind the cameras here at JNS TV, Ryan Lifshitz and Aaron Wogelantern, who are on the board, our producer Esther Eden, Zach Sickerman, and station manager Yuri Svertsky for all the important work they do. We couldn't get these shows up without all these people, folks. So thanks to all of them. Have a great week, and we will, please God, see you next week here on Judeacation, only on JNS TV.